Your mother disappeared. Who's going to pay the check? Jessica's shout cut across the entire restaurant. Every diner turned to look at their table, 20 guests for Jessica's 30th birthday celebration at Bellini's, the kind of upscale place where a dinner could easily cost $50 per person. Margaret Wilson had just stood up, grabbed her worn leather purse, and started walking toward the restroom. At least that's what David and Jessica thought. Margaret's silver hair, neatly styled for the occasion, caught the light of the crystal chandeliers as she moved between tables with surprising determination for a 68-year-old woman. Her pale blue eyes, reflecting the ambient light, betrayed no emotion as she passed the restroom door and continued straight to the exit where a taxi waited. Behind her, chaos erupted. Raised voices, confusion, a $450 unpaid check, and her son David desperately searching for her between tables while Jessica shouted that Margaret had ruined her perfect night. But that was just the beginning. In the taxi, Margaret's hands weren't shaking. Her heart wasn't racing with guilt or anxiety. Instead, a profound calm settled over her, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. 1542 Oak Street, please. And hurry. I only have 2 hours before they realize I'm not coming back. The taxi pulled away from Bellini's, its taillights disappearing into the night. As they drove through familiar streets, Margaret looked out the window at the life she was leaving behind. The city lights blurred through unshed tears, not of sadness, but of something that felt strangely like freedom. 2 years earlier, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Margaret had been preparing her simple dinner chicken soup with vegetables when her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, bringing a genuine smile to her face, creasing the wrinkles around her eyes. "Hello, son." Her voice warmed with real pleasure. "Mom, I need to ask you a huge favor. It's something urgent." There was that special tone in his voice, the one Margaret had learned to recognize after 35 years of motherhood. The tone that meant he needed something. Margaret's heart immediately sped up. "What happened, son? Are you okay? Is Jessica okay?" Yes, everyone's fine. It's just that we had an unexpected expense with Jessica's car, and this month we're a little short. Could you lend us $500? We'll pay you back next month. No fail." $500. Margaret's pension was $800 a month. She lived on a tight budget, but he was her son, her only son. How could she refuse? "Of course, David, I'll transfer it to you tomorrow." "You're the best mom in the world. I promise we'll pay you back soon." That promise hung in the air, never to materialize into reality. He never paid her back. The next month it was the air conditioner repair, $300, then Jessica's birthday, $200 to help with the celebration. After that, an expensive gift they wanted to give to an important partner of David's. Then their wedding anniversary, then new furniture for the living room, because the old pieces no longer matched the decor. In 6 months, Margaret had loaned more than $3,000. And every time she timidly mentioned the possibility of them starting to pay her back, David would look at her with disappointment. "Mom, I thought you were doing it because you loved us, not because you expected something in return. I didn't know you were keeping score." Those words made Margaret feel terrible, as if she were the villain, the stingy one, the selfish mother who put a price on love. So she stopped mentioning the money, and they stopped pretending they would ever return it. One evening, rummaging through her medicine cabinet for headache pills, Margaret discovered a small box hidden behind the prescription bottles. Inside was a delicate silver locket containing a picture of her late husband, Richard. She didn't remember placing it there. When she flipped the photo over, she found a carefully folded piece of paper. It was a list of all the money she had loaned to David and Jessica, written in her own handwriting, a list she didn't remember creating. The first sign that something within her had sensed something was wrong, so much so that her subconscious had started keeping track. The visits changed too. Before, David would come on Sundays for coffee to talk, to ask how she was. Now he only showed up when he needed something, and Jessica hardly ever came. When she did, she stayed glued to her phone, answering in monosyllables when Margaret tried to converse. One sleepless night, Margaret got out of bed and went to her closet. She pulled out an old shoebox and removed a small envelope. Inside was $200, a secret savings she had started to keep. "I can't go on like this," she whispered to Richard's photo on the wall. "I promised you I'd take care of our son, but I don't think this is what you meant." One Friday afternoon, David and Jessica arrived without warning. Margaret was preparing her simple dinner, a chicken soup with vegetables. She heard the key in the lock. David had always had a copy of her keys for emergencies. "Hi, Mom. We brought Chinese food. Are you hungry?" David walked in with his confident stride, not waiting for an answer. Jessica walked in behind him carrying several bags. For a moment, Margaret felt joy. They had thought of her. They wanted to share dinner with her. What a nice gesture. Son, I was just cooking, but don't worry. I'll save my food for tomorrow. We're starving. They settled at her table as if they were in their own house. They took out the food containers served themselves onto her plates. Margaret sat with them, smiling, trying to start a conversation. How was work this week? Fine, Mom, fine. David barely looked up. Jessica passed me the soy sauce. Jessica complied without looking away from her phone. Margaret, can you get the wine we left here last time? Margaret got up to look for the wine. It was an expensive bottle they had left weeks ago. She poured 2 glasses for them. They didn't offer her any. After dinner, David leaned back in the chair with a satisfied sigh. Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. There was that tone again, the request disguised as a conversation. Jessica and I are thinking of taking a trip for our anniversary. Something special, 3 years of marriage. We found an incredible all-inclusive package to Miami. The problem is that it's this month, and with all the expenses we had... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Margaret knew exactly what was coming. How much do you need? $2,000. His eyes, so like his father's, held none of Richard's kindness as they calculated her response. I know it's a lot, Mom, but it's our anniversary. You only get married once. $2,000. Almost 3 months of her pension. David, I don't have that amount available right now. For the first time all night, Jessica looked up from her phone and looked directly at Margaret. There was something cold in her eyes. You don't have savings. I have some saved, but it's for emergencies, for bet. And what is more important than the happiness of your own son? Jessica's voice hardened, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen of her phone. Margaret, David works so hard. He deserves a vacation. We would do the same for our parents if we had the money. The way she said Margaret's name. Not mother-in-law, not Mrs. Wilson, just Margaret, as if they were friends, or worse, as if she had some kind of authority over her. Let me see what I can do. The words fell from Margaret's lips before she could stop them, another surrender in a long line of capitulations. Thanks, Mom. I knew we could count on you. They left half an hour later, taking the rest of the wine and leaving the dirty dishes on the table. Margaret stayed sitting there looking at the remains of the dinner they had brought that she hadn't asked for, that they had devoured, and for which now in some twisted way she had to pay with her savings. That night Margaret cried for the first time in months, not exactly from sadness. It was something worse. It was the feeling of having become invisible, of existing only as a means to obtain something. But she wasn't ready to admit it yet. She was still convincing herself that this was how modern families were, that adult children needed support, that she was being dramatic. She transferred the $2,000 to them 2 days later. The trip to Miami lasted a week. During those 7 days, David sent her exactly 3 messages. The first was a photo of them at the airport with "We've taken off, Mom." The second was an image of the beach with "This is incredible." The third arrived on the last day. "We're coming back tomorrow. We love you." 3 messages in 7 days paid for with 2 years of her savings. They didn't call her a single time, not even to ask how she was, if she had eaten, if she needed anything. During that week, Margaret had to go to the doctor because her blood pressure suddenly spiked, and she spent 2 days feeling so dizzy that she could barely get out of bed. Alone, completely alone. Her neighbor, Mrs. Linda Carson, was the one who took her to the doctor's office. They barely knew each other. Linda owed her nothing. "Margaret, can't your son come with you? He's traveling with his wife. I don't want to worry him." Linda looked at her with something that looked like pity. She didn't say anything else, but her silence spoke louder than any words. When David and Jessica returned, 2 weeks passed before they came to visit Margaret. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon, tanned, relaxed, full of energy. They were carrying their suitcases. "Mom, we came to stay for the weekend. They're fumigating our building and the smell is unbearable." "There's no problem, right?" It wasn't a question. They were already walking in, leaving their things in Margaret's guest room that she used as a sewing room. "Of course, son, my house is your house." Margaret's voice trembled as she tried to maintain her smile. Jessica walked past her without even saying hello. She was heading straight for the bathroom with her makeup bag. Margaret heard her turn on the shower. "Mom, do you have anything to eat?" "We're starving." "I have ingredients to make something. What are you craving?" David threw himself onto the couch and turned on the television. I don't know. Whatever. Something good. At the hotel, we ate incredibly well every day. I miss that food. Something inside Margaret twisted. She had paid for that hotel, that incredible food, that luxury vacation. And now they were coming to her house, expecting her to keep taking care of them as if nothing had happened. But she didn't say anything. She never said anything. That night, after David and Jessica had gone to sleep in her guest room, Margaret got up to get a drink of water. As she passed the guest room, she heard Jessica speaking in a whisper. No, David, we've asked her for too much this year. Give her some time. And what do you want me to do? She's my mom. That's what mothers are for. Yes, but we need to be more strategic. We can't ask her every month. She's going to catch on. Catch on to what? Those words hit Margaret like a punch, as if there were a plan. As if she were a resource to be managed. She stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside her begin to break. A month after the Miami trip, Margaret's dizziness worsened. After fainting at home, she decided to go to the hospital. The doctor diagnosed her with mild heart failure, not immediately life-threatening, but requiring treatment. You need to reduce the stress in your life, the doctor warned. And you need to take this medication daily. Don't miss a single dose. Margaret looked at the prescription and swallowed hard. The cost would be $200 a month, money she didn't have after loaning David $2,000 for the Miami trip. When she finally reached David to inform him about her health condition, his reaction broke her heart. Oh, that's good that you're better, Mom. Hey, this pasta is a little dry. Don't you have more sauce? After that call, Margaret opened an old photo album and looked at a picture of David when he was small. A blond boy with a bright smile flying a kite on the beach, Richard standing proudly beside him. What happened to that boy? She whispered. What happened to our son? And then for the first time, another question arose in her mind. How much time do I have left with this heart condition? The countdown had begun. 2 months later, David called Margaret. Mom, have you thought about it? I need to know because the landlord is pushing. David, I really can't. I have no way to get that amount. But have you tried getting a loan? There are options. Mom, I'll help you look. A loan. He wanted her, a 68-year-old woman with an $800 monthly pension, to take out a loan to finance their luxury apartment. I'm not going to go into debt, son. The silence on the other end of the line was long uncomfortable. Okay, I guess we'll have to look for another option. He hung up without saying goodbye, without saying I love you, without asking how she was. He just hung up. A few days after the phone call, a letter arrived from the local bank. Margaret opened it and read with growing dismay. Dear Mrs. Wilson, we are pleased to inform you that your application for a home equity loan has been approved. She had never applied for a home equity loan. With trembling hands, she called the bank and discovered that someone had forged her signature on the application. The application was submitted by you and your son, David Wilson, the bank clerk explained. Margaret froze as she realized David had tried to borrow money by mortgaging her house without her permission. After the bank incident, Margaret began to see her relationship with her son and daughter-in-law more clearly. Instead of sitting by the phone waiting for David to call, she began building a life of her own. One afternoon, Linda invited her for coffee at her house. Margaret almost never accepted invitations because she always thought David might show up or call. But that day, after 2 weeks of silence, she accepted. Linda's house smelled of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee. She had photos everywhere of her children, her grandchildren, her trips. Everyone was smiling. It looked like a real family. How long since you've seen your son, Margaret? 2 weeks. He's busy with work and all that. Linda nodded while pouring the coffee. She didn't say anything, but Margaret noticed her lips tightened slightly. My kids come every Sunday sometimes during the week, too. They call me every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. I know I'm lucky. Margaret felt a pang of envy, of pain, of shame, too. David is a very hard worker. He has many responsibilities. Of course, but a call doesn't take that much time, does it? On her way home from Linda's house, Margaret passed by the office of a local attorney. A small sign in the window read, Free consultations for seniors on estate planning Wednesdays weekly from 1-4 p.m. She stopped staring at the sign for a long moment. It was Wednesday. Her watch showed 1:15. With a deep breath and a new determination, she pushed open the door and walked in. Jessica's birthday was approaching. She called Margaret 3 times about the gift, finally sending a wish list with expensive items ranging from $200 to $500. The ones I really like best are between $200 and $300, she said. Margaret went to the department store Jessica had indicated. She walked in with her old purse, her worn-out shoes feeling completely out of place among the elegant people buying expensive things. When she saw the prices, she felt the floor move beneath her feet. The cheapest item cost $180. It was a set of towels. The items Jessica really liked, the ones she had marked as favorites, ranged from $300 to $500. A designer purse, an aroma diffuser from a French brand, some Italian shoes. On the night of Jessica's birthday, Margaret dressed in her best outfit, her least old dress that she saved for special occasions. When she arrived, no one acknowledged her presence for a while. Finally, David looked up. "Oh, Mom, you made it. Sit wherever you find space." He didn't get up. He didn't come over to greet her. He didn't introduce her to his friends. Margaret found an empty chair near the end of the table, far from David and far from Jessica. She sat between two young couples she didn't know. They were talking to each other, laughing about something she didn't understand. "Hello." They said hello without really looking at her, and continued their conversation. Margaret stayed there, sitting with her gift in her lap, feeling completely invisible. A waiter approached with the wine list. "Would you like to order something to drink?" "Water is fine, thank you." "Are you sure we have an excellent selection of wines?" "Just water, please." Margaret wasn't going to spend money on wine when she knew she would probably have to contribute to pay the check. When it was time for Margaret's gift to be opened, Jessica did so quickly. She looked at the towels. She didn't even take them completely out of the box. "Oh, how nice. Thanks." And that was it. She set the box aside and moved on to the next gift. $180 discarded in 2 sentences. Margaret felt something hot rise up her throat. It wasn't crying. It was rage, a rage that had been accumulating for months and that now threatened to explode. When the waiter brought the check, David picked it up. His eyes widened a little when he saw the total. He turned to say something to Jessica in a low voice. She nodded. Then he looked toward where Margaret was. "Mom, can you come here for a moment?" Margaret got up and walked toward them. Her legs were trembling slightly. "Look, the check came out a little higher than we thought. It's about $450 in total. We are going to put in $300. Could you cover the rest you know as your contribution to Jessica's birthday?" $150, almost a month of food for Margaret, more than double her utility bill, half of her monthly pension. "David, I don't have that much cash on me." "Do you have a credit card?" "Yes, but perfect. Use the card. We'll figure it out later." "We'll figure it out later." That phrase that meant I'm never going to pay you back. "I don't know if I can." For the first time all night, Jessica looked directly at Margaret. There was something cold in her eyes, something calculating. "Margaret, it's my birthday. Are you really going to ruin my night over money?" Everyone at the table was starting to notice that something was happening. Conversations were fading away. People were looking at them. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. It's just that it's a lot of money, and Mom, please don't make a scene." David's voice sounded tense, ashamed, as if she were the one doing something wrong. Just then a sharp pain appeared in Margaret's chest. She felt short of breath. Her heart medication was in her purse. She needed some privacy. "I'm going to the restroom." She took her purse and walked toward the restrooms with a firm step. She heard David's voice behind her. "Mom, wait." But she didn't stop. She reached the hallway where the restrooms were. There was an emergency exit next to them, and next to that exit a door that led to the parking lot. She didn't think twice. She pushed the door and went out into the parking lot. The cold night air hit her face. Her hands trembled as she looked for her phone. She called a taxi. The operator told her it would arrive in 5 minutes. 5 minutes, that felt like an eternity. She stayed there, standing in the darkness of the parking lot, hidden behind a car, waiting. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every second she expected to hear David's voice calling her. She expected him to come out looking for her, but no one came out. The taxi arrived. She got in quickly and gave him her address. As they drove away from the restaurant, she looked back through the window. The lights of Bellini's shone in the distance. Inside they were all celebrating, eating, laughing, and she had just abandoned them with a $450 check unpaid. For the first time in years, she didn't feel guilty. She felt something akin to freedom. When Margaret arrived home, she went straight to her closet. She took out 3 suitcases and placed them on her bed. She started packing methodically, her movements calm and deliberate. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was practical, calculated. As she folded her clothes and placed them in the suitcases, her phone started ringing. It was David. She didn't answer. He called again. She didn't answer. Then the texts arrived. "Mom, where are you? Why did you leave like that? This is so embarrassing. Everyone is asking about you. You have to come back right now." Margaret put the phone on silent and continued packing. She gathered her important documents, her passport, her bank papers, the property deeds to the house. She placed them in a brown folder that she put on the living room coffee table. Then she went to her small safe hidden at the back of her closet. Inside, she kept money she had been secretly saving over the last year. It wasn't much, $1.200 that she had been saving little by little, $20 here, $30 there, depriving herself of things so she could have some security. That money was her escape route, and tonight she was finally going to use it. At 2:30 a.m., Margaret heard a car park in front of her house. Quick, angry footsteps, the key in the lock. The door opened violently. "Mom, where are you?" David's voice sounded agitated, angry. Jessica came in behind him. Margaret could hear her heels against the wooden floor. They didn't turn on the light immediately. They were looking for her in the dark. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair with her suitcases on one side, with her documents on the table, looking at them with a calmness they had never seen in her. When David flipped on the light, he stood paralyzed. His mouth opened, but no sound came out for several seconds. Then he screamed. It wasn't words at first, just a scream of pure desperation, as if he had just seen a ghost. What is this?" His voice trembled as he looked at the suitcases, the documents, her serene expression. Jessica stepped forward. Her makeup was smeared smudges of mascara under her eyes. Her red dress now looked wrinkled. She had lost all her elegance. "Do you know the humiliation you put us through? Do you have any idea what we had to do to pay that check?" Margaret looked at her without saying anything. She just looked at her. "We had to borrow from my friends. My friends, Margaret. We looked like freeloaders in front of everyone. And it's all your fault because you decided to pull your stunt and leave like a spoiled child." David took a step toward Margaret. "Mom, this is too much. I know we sometimes ask you for help, and I know we don't always pay you back quickly, but that doesn't give you the right to abandon us like this, to leave us embarrassed. What is wrong with you? What is all this?" He pointed to the suitcases. Margaret finally opened her mouth. Her voice came out calm, cold, firm. "I'm leaving. Leaving where to? Far away. To start over. To live the rest of my life with dignity." David laughed a nervous laugh, disbelieving. "Dignity, Mom? Don't be ridiculous. You have nowhere to go. You don't have money. I have money. I have savings you don't know about. And I have plans. Plans, but you can't do anything alone. You've always depended on us." That phrase hit Margaret like a slap. "You've always depended on us," when the reality was exactly the opposite. "I have never depended on you, David. You have depended on me, on my pension, on my savings, on my house, on my time. For 2 years, I have been your personal bank and your free maid, and never, not once, have you shown genuine appreciation." Jessica scoffed. "Oh, please. We asked for help like any normal family. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal more than $10,000 in 2 years, Jessica. $10,000 that you never paid back. That came out of my $800 monthly pension. While you two went on vacation to Miami, bought expensive clothes, and moved into luxury apartments." David picked up the papers from the table. His eyes scanned the lines. Margaret watched his face change color from the red of rage to the white of shock. "You sold the house." The words barely escaped his lips. "I sold it 3 weeks ago for $120,000. "And you didn't consult us." David's voice rose to a shout. "This house was mine, David. It was in my name." Margaret leaned forward, her voice hardening. "And besides, you weren't the one who needed to be consulted. You were the one who tried to forge my signature to mortgage my house. I talked to the bank, David. I know what you tried to do." David's face went even paler. The rest of the night unfolded in a blur of accusations and revelations. David and Jessica raging against Margaret's betrayal. Margaret calmly explaining her decision, unmoved by their pleas and threats. And finally, as dawn approached, David and Jessica leaving, slamming the door behind them. Margaret remained in her armchair, 3 packed suitcases beside her, feeling strangely at peace. She had survived the confrontation. She had stood her ground. And in a few hours, a taxi would take her to the bus station where she would begin her journey to a new life, a life of her own choosing. For the first time in decades, Margaret Wilson was thinking about herself first, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The Greyhound bus pulled away from the station while dawn was still a promise on the horizon. Margaret Wilson sat by the window, 3 suitcases stored safely beneath, watching the city lights fade into the darkness. 6 hours of highway stretched between her past and her future, between the life where she had gradually disappeared and a coastal town called Shore Haven, where she hoped to become visible again. "Going somewhere nice, ma'am?" The driver's question floated back as he adjusted his mirror. Margaret's gaze remained fixed on the receding skyline. Not somewhere nice, somewhere new. As the miles accumulated, so did the texts on Margaret's phone. 23 messages from David in just the first hour. She read each one, watching the progression from fury to panic to manipulation. "You've ruined everything. How could you do this to your own son? Where are you? Are you safe at least? Mom, we need to talk about the money from the house. That's my inheritance. I'm sorry if we hurt your feelings. Please come back. We're in real trouble here, Mom. We need your help." With each message, the grip of guilt around Margaret's heart loosened a little more. When the phone buzzed a 24th time, she turned it off completely, slipped it into her purse, and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she slept deeply and without dreams. The coastline appeared like a revelation, sparkling blue, stretching to the horizon, dotted with white sails catching the midday sun. Shore Haven unfolded beneath them as the bus descended the coastal highway, a small town of weathered cedar buildings, colorful storefronts, and streets lined with oak trees just starting to show their spring green. It wasn't paradise, but it felt like possibility. Linda Carson waited at the small bus terminal, her auburn hair touched with gray at the temples, a wide smile transforming her face. She stood taller than Margaret remembered, dressed in loose linen pants and a flowing tunic that spoke of a life lived differently from the structured city existence Margaret had known. The bus doors hissed open. Margaret descended slowly, suddenly uncertain. She'd left everything behind. What if this new beginning was just another kind of disappearing? Linda's arms encircled her before doubt could take root. "Margaret," the warmth in her voice bridging the 5-year gap since they'd last seen each other. "Welcome to your fresh start." The embrace lasted longer than Margaret expected, and something inside her cracked open. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be held without an ulterior motive to be touched, not as a precursor to a request, but simply as an affirmation of existence. Linda's home sat 3 blocks from the ocean, a small blue cottage with a wraparound porch and window boxes spilling over with geraniums. The guest room was modest but bright, a twin bed with fresh linens, a small desk beneath a window overlooking a garden riot with early spring flowers, and a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. "It's not much." Linda's hand rested lightly on the doorframe. "But it's yours for as long as you need it." That night, over homemade vegetable soup and crusty bread, Margaret unfolded her story. Each painful detail emerged: the loans never repaid, the dismissive treatment, the overheard conversation about being strategic, the forged signature on the loan application. Linda listened without interrupting her expression, shifting from surprise to indignation to resolve. "What they did to you isn't just inconsiderate, Margaret. It's elder financial abuse. There's a term for it. There are laws against it. You're not crazy for feeling used." Margaret's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Elder abuse? That seems extreme. They're my family. Family should protect you, not exploit you. Look at what they've done: taken your money, forged your signature, manipulated your emotions. If they were strangers, you'd have called the police." The realization settled into Margaret's bones with the weight of truth. She'd spent so long excusing their behavior that she'd normalized the abnormal, accepted the unacceptable. "What do I do now?" The question hung between them both, terrifying and exhilarating. "You live, Margaret. Not for them. For you." The next morning, Linda took Margaret on a tour of Shore Haven. The town unfolded around them like a novel setting the main street with its quirky shops and cafes. The public library housed in a converted Victorian mansion, the community center offering everything from Tai Chi to tax preparation for seniors, and finally the bookstore. Pages by the Sea occupied a weathered blue building at the corner of Harbor and Elm. Bay windows displayed artfully arranged stacks of books interspersed with nautical artifacts, glass floats, small wooden boats, a sextant catching the morning light. A bell tinkled softly as they entered, and the scent of coffee-old books and sea air wrapped around them. Susan Hamilton looked up from behind the counter, silver-framed reading glasses perched on her nose, her white hair pulled back in a loose bun. Something in her direct gaze made Margaret stand a little straighter. "So this is the famous Margaret I've been hearing about." Susan's smile crinkled the corners of her eyes as she extended her hand. "Linda says you've made a brave decision." Margaret's laugh emerged rusty from disuse. "Brave or foolish? I'm not sure yet." "The best decisions often look like both." Susan's hand was warm and firm. "Until time proves them necessary." The bookstore had a small cafe tucked into its back corner with mismatched tables and chairs, creating intimate conversation nooks. Over locally roasted coffee, Susan shared her own story, her 30-year teaching career, her 2 daughters who had moved across the country, her husband's death 5 years ago, and her decision to buy the bookstore as both investment and purpose. "After Jerome died, my girls thought I should sell the house and move to a retirement community in Florida. It would be easier, Mom," they said. What they meant was it would be easier for them to imagine me safely tucked away to visit once a year with a clean conscience. Susan's fingers traced the rim of her mug. "I realized they saw me as a problem to be managed, not a person still becoming. So I bought this place instead." They were furious. Didn't speak to me for months. "And now," Margaret leaned forward, desperate to hear that estrangement wasn't always permanent. "Now we have what I call a respectful distance. Christmas cards, occasional calls. They've come to accept that I have a life that doesn't revolve around their comfort. It's not what I would have chosen, but it's honest." As they were leaving, Susan touched Margaret's arm lightly. "We have a group that meets here on Thursday evenings. Women in similar situations, rebuilding after loss manipulation or just plain life disappointment. You might find it helpful." "I'm not much of a joiner." Margaret hesitated, the prospect of exposing her wounds to strangers still too raw. "Neither was I." Susan's eyes held understanding rather than pressure. "Until I realized I couldn't heal in the same isolation that had wounded me." Back at Linda's house, Margaret unpacked her suitcases, hanging clothes in the guest room closet, arranging her few personal items on the dresser. Each object placed felt like a small claim on this new reality: the silver-backed hairbrush that had been her mother's, the framed photo of Richard holding newborn David, the small watercolor of oak trees she'd painted in a community class years ago. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd done. She had sold her home's severed ties with her only child and moved to a town where she knew exactly one person. The practical questions she'd avoided crashed in. How would she live? What would she do all day? What if her heart condition worsened? "I think I've made a terrible mistake." The admission burst from her as Linda appeared in the doorway with fresh towels. "No." Linda set the towels down and sat beside Margaret on the bed. "You've made a difficult choice. There's a difference. A mistake is accidental. A choice is deliberate, even when it hurts." That evening they walked along the shore as sunset painted the sky in improbable colors. The rhythmic wash of waves against sand soothed something in Margaret that had been jangled for too long. She stopped removing her shoes to feel the cool sand between her toes. "I haven't done this since David was small." She wiggled her feet deeper, remembering summer vacations when David would race along the waterline, Richard chasing him with exaggerated monster steps. "What else haven't you done? What else might you want to try now?" Linda's question opened a door Margaret hadn't known was locked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long thinking about what they needed that I'm not sure I remember what I want." "That's where we start, then." Linda linked her arm through Margaret's. Not with answers, but with permission to ask the question. Over the next few weeks, Margaret fell into the gentle rhythm of Shore Haven. Mornings began with coffee on Linda's porch, watching fishing boats head out to sea. Some days she walked the beach collecting shells and sea glass that accumulated in a glass bowl on her dresser. Other days she explored the town, discovering its hidden corners, a pottery studio offering classes, a community garden with plots available for summer planting, a small art gallery featuring local artists. She began volunteering at the bookstore initially, just shelving returned books and dusting neglected corners. Susan taught her to use the cash register to make the perfect latte to track inventory. The work wasn't challenging, but it was tangible. At the end of each day, Margaret could see what she had accomplished. Books properly placed surfaces, gleaming, customers satisfied. "You have good instincts for which books to recommend." Susan observed one afternoon after Margaret had spent half an hour helping a teenage girl find something like The Outsiders, but not for school. I used to teach English literature before David was born. The admission slipped out, surprising Margaret herself. I'd forgotten how much I loved connecting people with the right story. Susan raised an eyebrow. Would you consider leading our classic literature discussion group? Our previous leader moved to Portland last month, and we've been looking for someone who knows their Austen from their Bronte. Something flickered in Margaret's chest, not quite joy, but its precursor, a spark of purpose. I might. Let me think about it. That Thursday, Margaret found herself outside Pages by the Sea at 6:45 p.m., debating whether to enter. Through the window, she could see a circle of women gathering, ranging in age from late 50s to what must be 80s, arranging chairs in the central reading area. Susan noticed her hesitation and opened the door. Just come in and listen. You don't have to share unless you want to. 8 women turned to look as Margaret entered, their expressions open and curious rather than judgmental. Susan made brief introductions, ending with Patricia Monroe, a tall, elegant woman in her 70s with short silver hair and keen brown eyes. Welcome to the Sisterhood of the Second Chapter, Patricia gestured to an empty chair beside her. We're all experts in fresh starts here. The meeting began with check-ins, brief updates on challenges and victories since the previous gathering. Margaret listened astonished at the similarities in their stories. Barbara had lost her home after co-signing a loan for her gambling-addicted son. Elena's daughter had stolen her identity and run up tens of thousands in credit card debt. Josephine's family had tried to have her declared mentally incompetent when she refused to bankroll their failing business ventures. It's not just you, Patricia whispered as the sharing continued around the circle. It's a whole silent epidemic. When it came Margaret's turn, she intended to pass, but instead found herself recounting the night of Jessica's birthday dinner and her subsequent escape. I feel terrible about the restaurant bill, she concluded, the guilt still fresh. I've never done anything like that in my life. Don't, Barbara shook her head firmly. They'd already taken thousands from you. A $150 dinner tab is just the service charge on their entitlement. What I want to make clear, Susan interjected gently, is that this isn't about the money. It's about respect, about being seen as a person with your own needs and rights, not just a resource to be depleted. And that's something none of us should apologize for demanding. After the meeting, the group migrated to a local wine bar called the Crow's Nest. Margaret found herself seated between Patricia and a former nurse named Helen, nursing a glass of Chardonnay and laughing more than she had in years. To liberation, Patricia raised her glass in a toast, however late it comes. To boundaries, Helen added, however difficult to maintain. To us, Margaret surprised herself by completing the toast. However imperfectly, we're figuring it out. The evening ended with phone numbers exchanged and tentative plans for a beach walk on Saturday. As Margaret and Linda walked home under a canopy of stars, the ocean's whisper a constant backdrop, Margaret felt something uncurling inside her, the slow, cautious bloom of possibility. I think I might look for my own place soon, she said as they approached Linda's cottage. Not that I don't appreciate your hospitality, but you need your own space, Linda finished for her. I've been expecting this. Actually, Mrs. Whitman in the blue duplex on Lighthouse Road is looking for a tenant for the upper floor. It's small, but it has an ocean view, and she only wants $600 a month because she likes having someone around. 3 days later, Margaret signed a month-to-month lease on the apartment. A 1-bedroom space with sloped ceilings, a tiny kitchen, and a bay window overlooking the harbor. The furnishings were sparse, a double bed, a drop-leaf table with 2 chairs, a reading chair by the window, but it was hers. Not a placeholder, not a way station, but a deliberate choice. As May turned to June, Margaret's life acquired texture and substance. She worked at the bookstore 3 days a week, led the classic literature discussion on Tuesday evenings, and took a watercolor class at the community center on Saturdays. Her social circle expanded cautiously, morning coffee with Susan before the store opened beach walks with Patricia, garden planning with Elena, who had a plot adjacent to the small one Margaret had claimed. On a warm evening in mid-June, Margaret sat on the small balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset paint the harbor in gold and rose. Her phone, which she'd finally turned back on after weeks of silence, chimed with a notification. The message wasn't from David, but from Jessica. Margaret, I know we're not friends, but I need to talk to you. David is struggling. He lost his job. We lost the apartment. We're living with my parents, and it's awful. I'm not calling to ask for money. I'm calling because I never apologized for how I treated you. You were right about us. We used you. And now I'm in your position with my parents, and I finally understand." Margaret stared at the message emotions colliding like weather fronts: suspicion, concern, vindication, wariness. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation? She brought the message to the Thursday group, seeking their collective wisdom. "It's a trap," Barbara declared immediately. "They've hit bottom and need your money again." Maybe Patricia was more measured. But people do sometimes wake up when they're forced to see themselves clearly. "Why not call her?" Susan suggested. "From a new number that David doesn't know. Listen to her voice. Trust your gut." The next day, Margaret purchased a prepaid phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed Jessica's number, steeling herself for whatever might come. "Jessica, this is Margaret." A long silence, then a shaky exhale. "Margaret, I didn't think you'd call back." "I'm not sure I should have. I don't know if I can trust your message." "I understand. I wouldn't trust me either." Margaret cut to the heart of the matter. "David tried to access a bank account I didn't know existed. Did you know about that?" A sharp intake of breath. "No, I swear I didn't know. He's changed, Margaret. Losing his job hit him hard. He drinks a lot now. He's become bitter. That's why we had to move in with my parents. And now your parents treat you the way you treated me." A bitter laugh tinged with something like shame. "Exactly. They charge us rent. They complain about our habits. They make us feel like a burden. And now I finally understand what it feels like to be treated like an ATM." The conversation continued for almost an hour. Jessica explained how they'd lost the luxury apartment when David was laid off from his sales manager position, how they'd been forced to move in with her parents who micromanaged their lives, and made constant cutting remarks about their financial irresponsibility. "Why are you calling now, Jessica, really?" The silence stretched taut between them. "I'm pregnant." Jessica's voice had become small and wounded. 5 months along. David doesn't know how to tell you. He wants you in the baby's life, but he's too proud to ask. Margaret felt her heart stutter in her chest. "I'm going to be a grandmother." "Yes, a girl." The news reverberated through Margaret's carefully constructed new life, disrupting its delicate balance. A granddaughter, a continuation of family beyond the brokenness between her and David. Something both beautiful and complicated. "I need time to think about this," Margaret finally said. "This isn't a simple situation." "I know. Take all the time you need." After ending the call, Margaret walked to the beach, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. She found herself at the water's edge, waves lapping at her bare feet, the vastness of the ocean, both comfort and challenge. "What would you do, Richard?" she whispered to the horizon. "Would you go back? Would you forgive?" The only answer was the steady rhythm of waves against sand, constant yet ever-changing. Like grief, like growth. When Margaret shared the news with the Thursday group, reactions were mixed. Barbara warned of emotional manipulation, using the baby as leverage. Helen suggested cautious re-engagement with clear boundaries. Patricia simply asked, "What do you want, Margaret? Not what you should want or what would make things easier for them. What do you want?" The question haunted Margaret for days as she went through the motions of her new life, shelving books, watering her garden plot, walking the shore at dawn. What did she want? The answer emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in solution. She wanted to know her granddaughter. She wanted some kind of relationship with her son. But she could not return to being their financial safety net or emotional doormat. A week later, when Margaret checked her bank statement online, an irregularity caught her eye. Someone had attempted to withdraw $5,000 from an account she didn't recognize, a joint account, apparently established in both her and David's names. The bank had flagged it as suspicious activity and frozen the transaction. With a sense of dread, Margaret called the bank, only to discover that David had somehow transferred a portion of the house sale proceeds into this joint account and was now attempting to access it. The betrayal struck Margaret physically, a blow to the solar plexus that left her gasping. Even now, even after everything he was still trying to take from her. "I should never have turned my phone back on," she told Linda that evening, tears of rage and disappointment streaming down her face. "I should have known better." "Maybe this is exactly what you needed to see." Linda's voice was gentle but firm. "Now you know the truth isn't somewhere in the middle. The problem isn't a misunderstanding or poor communication. It's his behavior, his choices. The realization settled into Margaret's bones, a truth both painful and clarifying. She wasn't responsible for fixing David. She couldn't heal what she hadn't broken. In late June, a message appeared on Margaret's original phone, not from David, but from a number she didn't recognize. "Mom, it's David. I'm using Jessica's old phone because I thought you might have blocked mine. I know where you are. Linda posted a photo on social media and I saw you in the background. I'm coming there. We need to talk face to face." The message sent adrenaline coursing through Margaret's veins. The careful life she'd been building in Shore Haven suddenly felt threatened, as if a storm was approaching her peaceful harbor. "He can't make you do anything," Susan reassured her when Margaret showed her the message. "You're not legally obligated to see him or speak to him." "I know, but—" Margaret struggled to articulate the complex emotions colliding within her. "He's still my son, and there's the baby to consider now." "Then meet him on your terms," Patricia advised during their morning beach walk. "Not at your apartment. Somewhere public. Bring someone with you if you want. And be clear about your boundaries before he even arrives," Helen added during their community garden session. "Write them down. Practice saying them out loud. Don't let yourself get railroaded in the moment." 2 days later, David appeared at Linda's house, knowing only the town but not Margaret's new address. Linda called Margaret immediately. "He's here at my house asking for you. He looks terrible, Margaret. Haggard. Exhausted." Margaret's hand tightened around the phone. "I'm coming over." The walk to Linda's house felt like the longest journey of Margaret's life, each step weighted with anticipation and dread. What would she say to the son who had betrayed her trust repeatedly? How could she protect her heart while still leaving room for possible reconciliation? David sat in Linda's living room, a ghost of his former self. He had lost weight. Dark circles underscored his eyes. His clothes, once immaculate, looked wrinkled and worn. "Mom," the word broke in his throat, years of complication contained in a single syllable. Margaret remained standing, unwilling to move closer, unwilling to retreat. "David, can we talk privately?" His eyes darted toward Linda, who stood watchful in the kitchen doorway. "I'll be in the garden if you need me." Linda's gaze conveyed both support and warning to Margaret before she slipped out the back door. David and Margaret moved to the small patio sitting on opposite sides of a wrought iron table. A lemon tree provided dappled shade, its fragrance mingling with the salt air. "I know about the bank account, David." Margaret didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know you tried to take money from me again even after everything that's happened." The color drained from his face. "Mom, I can explain." Can you explain forging my signature, trying to mortgage my house without my knowledge, setting up accounts in my name? Tell me what explanation would make any of that acceptable." David's shoulders slumped, the facade of righteousness crumbling. "I screwed up. Badly. And not just with money. With everything. I've treated you like you weren't even a person. Just a resource. A safety net." "Yes." Margaret's voice remained steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "You did. I'm sorry." His voice cracked on the words. "For everything. I know that's not enough. I know I can't fix this with an apology. But I am sorry." Margaret studied her son's face, searching for sincerity beneath the desperation. "Why did you come here?" "David, really?" He looked down at his hands, once smooth with expensive manicures, now showing the beginning of calluses. "I lost everything, Mom. My job. The apartment. Jessica's parents treat us like we're worthless. Nothing I do is good enough." "So you came to me because you need money again?" Margaret's heart hardened against the familiar pattern. "No," David's head snapped up. "Yes. I mean, I did come hoping for help, but I also came because—" He faltered, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. "Because I miss you. Because when Emma was born, I realized what I'd done. What I'd lost." "Emma." The name caught in Margaret's throat. "Your granddaughter. She was born in January. She has your eyes, Mom. Your exact eyes." A granddaughter. Already born. Already in the world for months without Margaret's knowledge. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. "You had a baby and didn't tell me." Margaret's voice rose despite her effort to maintain composure. "How could you keep that from me? We thought you'd come back." David's voice was small now, childlike in its simplicity. "We thought it was just a phase that you'd get over being angry and come home. By the time we realized you weren't coming back, it seemed too late. Too much had happened." Margaret closed her eyes, imagining the infant she'd never seen, never held. A piece of herself continuing into the future unknown and separate. I didn't come back because there was nothing to come back to David. Not a relationship. Not mutual respect. Just a one-way flow of support and resources until I had nothing left to give. I know that now. David's voice was barely audible. Becoming a father. It changed something in me. Made me see what I'd become. What I'd done to you. Margaret opened her eyes to study her son, trying to discern truth from manipulation. Jessica said you're having financial problems. Is that why you tried to access that account? David nodded, shame evident in the slump of his shoulders. We were desperate. The medical bills from Emma's birth, losing the apartment, having to pay rent to Jessica's parents, who remind us daily what failures we are. I thought I could take just enough to get us back on our feet. By stealing from me, again. The words hung between them stark and undeniable. Yes, David didn't attempt to defend himself. I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things for so long that I'm not sure I know how to be right anymore. The simple admission, devoid of excuses or deflection, penetrated Margaret's armor in a way nothing else could have. This wasn't the entitled David demanding his due. This was something new, or perhaps something very old, a glimpse of the son she'd once known before money and status had corrupted his character. I'd like to meet Emma, Margaret said, finally surprising herself with the certainty of it. Hope flickered across David's exhausted face. Really, you'd want that. She's my granddaughter. She deserves to know she has a grandmother who cares about her. But David listened to me very carefully. This doesn't mean I'm coming back. It doesn't mean I'm giving you money. It doesn't mean things return to how they were. Then what does it mean? Confusion replaced hope in his expression. It means we start from scratch. We build something new, something based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. If you can't accept that, then this conversation is over. David was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words against his desperation. Finally, he nodded slowly. I can try. I want to try. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Linda's garden, Margaret and David tentatively sketched the outline of a new relationship, one with stated expectations, defined boundaries, and no financial entanglements. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning fragile, as a new shoot pushing through hard ground. When David left that evening, Margaret walked to the shore alone, needing to process the tectonic shift in her carefully reconstructed life. The ocean spread before her vast and changeless, despite the constant motion of its waves. The path forward wasn't clear, and perhaps it never would be. But for the first time, Margaret felt she was choosing that path, rather than being swept along by others' expectations. She was steering her own vessel now, navigating by stars she'd only recently allowed herself to see. A line from one of his books she'd recommended to a customer earlier that week surfaced in her mind. The heart is not like a door with a single lock and key. It is a landscape that can be approached from many directions through many weathers. Maybe that was the truth of family, too. Not a fixed structure, but a living geography constantly reshaped by the forces moving through and around it. Maybe there was room for both boundaries and connection for both self-preservation and cautious hope. As twilight deepened around her, Margaret made a decision. She would meet her granddaughter. She would leave the door open to a new kind of relationship with her son. But she would never again surrender her hard-won independence or sense of self-worth. The waves continued their ancient rhythm against the shore, a reminder that nothing, not pain, not joy, not complicated family dynamics, lasted forever. Everything changed. Everything evolved. The only constant was the choice made anew each day to live with integrity and purpose. Margaret turned from the ocean and began the walk back to her apartment, each step carrying her further into the life she was choosing word by word and day by day to write for herself. 1 week after David's unexpected appearance in Shore Haven, Margaret stood outside Bellini's Cafe, a quaint establishment unrelated to the upscale restaurant she had fled months earlier. Her reflection in the window revealed a woman transformed not just by the new linen dress and carefully styled silver hair, but by the straight spine and lifted chin that spoke of reclaimed dignity. Inside, David sat at a corner table cradling a small bundle wrapped in a pale pink blanket. Jessica was noticeably absent, a deliberate choice they had agreed upon during a tense phone call the previous evening. This first meeting would be simpler with just 3 generations present grandfather-son and the newest branch of their complicated family tree. The bell above the door announced Margaret's entrance. David looked up, his expression a kaleidoscope of hope, uncertainty, and exhaustion. The bags beneath his eyes had deepened, and a newfound humility had replaced his once confident posture. Margaret approached slowly, her heart thundering against her ribs. All the carefully rehearsed greetings evaporated as her gaze fell upon the tiny face nestled against David's chest. "Mom, this is Emma." David shifted the bundle gently, revealing a cherubic face framed by wisps of blonde hair. "Emma, this is your grandmother." The infant regarded Margaret with startling blue eyes. Richard's eyes, Margaret's eyes, set in a face that echoed David's baby pictures with uncanny precision. 5 months old now, with rounded cheeks and a serious expression that studied Margaret with unnerving intensity. "May I?" Margaret extended her arms, surprised by their steadiness despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. The transfer was awkward, David clearly still learning the choreography of parenthood. Then Emma was in Margaret's arms, a warm weight that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. The baby studied her with solemn curiosity before her rosebud mouth curved into a sudden gummy smile. "Hello, little one," Margaret's voice emerged rough with emotion. "I'm your grandmother, Margaret." "Gamma." Emma's tiny hand reached up to touch Margaret's pearl earring. "Yes, Grandma." The title settled around Margaret's shoulders, a mantle both weighty and precious. "She's just starting to babble." David's voice carried a note of pride Margaret hadn't heard in years. "The doctor says she's advanced for her age." For the next hour, they existed in a fragile bubble of tentative conversation and baby-focused interaction. David recounted Emma's birth, the emergency C-section after Jessica's blood pressure spiked dangerously, the terrifying hours in the NICU, the overwhelming joy and fear of bringing her home. Margaret listened, absorbing the story of her granddaughter's arrival that she should have witnessed firsthand. "She has your temperament," David observed as Emma contentedly examined a wooden spoon the waitress had brought her. "Observant, patient. Jessica and I are both so high-strung, but Emma just takes things in." The simple observation revealed more than David probably intended, that he saw his mother as a distinct person with traits worth noticing, worth valuing. A small acknowledgement, but significant in its departure from years of treating her as merely a resource. When Emma began to fuss, signaling the end of her patience, Margaret handed her back to David. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, the first physical contact between mother and son since she had left. "How is Jessica?" Margaret kept her voice neutral despite the complex emotions the name evoked. David's expression clouded. "Struggling. The pregnancy was hard on her. The doctor says she has postpartum depression, but she won't take the medication. Her parents keep telling her she just needs to try harder, that depression is for people who don't have real problems." "That sounds familiar?" Margaret couldn't keep the edge from her voice, remembering all the times her own health concerns had been dismissed. David winced, recognizing the parallel. "I know. I'm seeing a lot of patterns now that I wish I'd noticed sooner." He shifted Emma to his shoulder, patting her back with a practiced rhythm. "Jessica's parents are like a mirror showing us what we were doing to you. It's not a flattering reflection." When they parted on the sidewalk outside, David hesitated before asking, "Would you want to see her again? Maybe next week?" "Yes," Margaret answered without hesitation. "But I meant what I said before, David. I want to be part of Emma's life, but I won't return to our old patterns." "I understand." He rocked slightly as Emma began to fuss. "I'm trying to be better mom. For Emma, for Jessica, for myself." Margaret watched them walk away, David murmuring softly to his daughter, his shoulders bearing the weight of new responsibilities. Only when they turned the corner did she allow the tears to fall, not from grief this time, but from something more complex. The bittersweet recognition that loving her granddaughter didn't erase the pain of the past, but perhaps gave it new context. The weekly meetings with Emma quickly became the cornerstone of Margaret's carefully reconstructed life. Each Thursday afternoon, David would bring his daughter to a designated location, the beachfront park, the children's section of the library, occasionally Margaret's small apartment when weather demanded indoor activities. Jessica remained conspicuously absent, her depression apparently deepening despite David's efforts to get her appropriate care. Margaret established clear parameters for these visits. She did not provide money. She did not solve David's problems. She did not offer unsolicited advice about his marriage or finances. She simply showed up, built a relationship with her granddaughter, and maintained the boundaries that preserved her hard-won sense of self. "You're doing the hardest thing," Susan observed one morning as they prepared the bookstore for opening. "Creating a new relationship from the ashes of the old without falling back into destructive patterns. Some days it feels impossible." Margaret arranged a display of coastal-themed children's books, selecting a few she thought Emma might enjoy. "I see him struggling, and part of me still wants to fix everything. Mother's instinct, I suppose. There's a difference between supporting and rescuing." Susan straightened her glasses with a familiar gesture. "You're learning to do the first without slipping into the second. It's a thin line, but an important one." The distinction was tested 3 weeks later when Margaret's phone rang at 2:14 a.m. David's frantic voice crackled through the connection. "Mom, I need help. Jessica's in the hospital. She collapsed something about her blood pressure. They think it might be preeclampsia complications that never fully resolved after Emma's birth. I'm here with her, but there's no one to watch Emma. Her parents are on a cruise, and I don't know what to do." Margaret was already reaching for clothes before he finished speaking. "Where is Emma now?" "With our neighbor, but she can't keep her overnight. She has to leave for work in an hour." "Text me the address. I'll be there as soon as I can." The taxi ride to the neighboring town where David and Jessica now lived stretched Margaret's nerves to breaking point. The modest apartment complex sat in a working-class neighborhood, a far cry from the luxury high-rise they had once inhabited. The neighbor, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, handed over a sleeping Emma along with a diaper bag and hurried instructions before rushing off to her night shift. Margaret settled into David and Jessica's small apartment, taking in the humble surroundings. Gone were the designer furnishings and expensive electronics. In their place stood secondhand furniture carefully arranged to create a homey atmosphere, despite obvious financial constraints. Emma's things dominated the space: a portable crib in the living room, baby toys scattered across the floor, a high chair pulled up to the small dining table. On the refrigerator, Margaret noticed a budget worksheet in David's handwriting, detailing a careful allocation of his 2 jobs' paychecks. A far cry from the careless spending of before. Beside it hung a photograph of the 3 of them, David, Jessica, and newborn Emma, looking exhausted but radiant in the harsh hospital lighting. Emma woke at dawn confused to find her grandmother instead of her parents. After initial tears were soothed, they settled into a morning routine cobbled together from Margaret's distant memories of motherhood and Emma's insistent communications about her preferences. David called at noon, his voice ragged with fatigue. "The doctors want to keep her for at least 48 hours. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, and they're concerned about possible seizures. Mom, I hate to ask, but is there any way you could stay with Emma? I need to be here with Jessica, and I can't afford to miss my shift at the warehouse tomorrow night." Margaret felt the familiar pull of obligation warring with her hard-won boundaries. "I can stay through tomorrow, but I need to be back in Shore Haven for my doctor's appointment on Wednesday. My heart medication needs adjusting." The silence stretched between them, David clearly having forgotten about her own health issues. "Of course. Your health matters too. I'll figure something out for Wednesday if Jessica isn't released by then." The acknowledgement, small but significant, reassured Margaret that this emergency wasn't dragging them back into old patterns. She was helping, yes, but on her terms with her needs still valid in the equation. For the next 36 hours, Margaret cared for Emma while maintaining regular contact with David about Jessica's condition. She navigated the unfamiliar terrain of modern baby care disposable diapers more complex than she remembered baby food in pouches rather than jars, the elaborate digital monitor system that transmitted Emma's breathing patterns to an app on her parents' phones. Through it all, a bond solidified between grandmother and granddaughter. Emma's initial wariness gave way to delighted recognition, her face lighting up when Margaret entered the room, her small arms reaching up with absolute trust. By Tuesday evening, Margaret had reorganized the apartment's haphazard storage systems, prepared several freezer meals from the limited ingredients available, and created a primitive mobile from paper and string that fascinated Emma for hours. Small contributions that supported without overstepping, that acknowledged need without enabling dependence. When David returned on Tuesday night, Jessica stabilized, but still hospitalized. The shift in their dynamic was palpable. He thanked Margaret without the entitled assumption that her help was merely expected. He listened attentively to her observations about Emma's preferences. He insisted on calling her a taxi rather than allowing her to take the bus back to Shore Haven. "Mom!" His voice caught as they stood outside the apartment building Emma balanced on his hip. "I don't deserve your help after everything, but I'm grateful. And I'm sorry not just in words, but I'm trying to be sorry in actions too." Margaret reached out to smooth Emma's fine hair. "We're family, David. That hasn't changed. What's changed is how we define what that means." The health crisis marked a turning point in their cautious reconstruction. David began texting Margaret regularly with updates and photos of Emma's development. Margaret responded with appropriate enthusiasm but maintained her emotional distance, still wary of fully trusting his transformation. Jessica remained largely absent from these exchanges, her recovery apparently complicated by deepening depression and anxiety. Margaret felt an unexpected empathy for her daughter-in-law, recognizing the familiar pattern of a woman disappearing beneath the weight of others' expectations. In late July, Margaret received a call from Jessica herself, the first direct contact since their confrontation months earlier. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from." Jessica's voice sounded smaller, stripped of its former entitlement. "But I needed to thank you for helping with Emma when I was in the hospital, and to apologize. Not just for that night at the restaurant, but for 2 years of treating you like an ATM instead of a person. You deserved better." Margaret sat on her balcony watching fishing boats return to harbor as sunset painted the water gold. "Thank you for saying that. It matters to hear it. My therapist says I need to make amends to people I've hurt," Jessica continued. "Not to be forgiven, but because acknowledging harm is part of stopping the cycle. I grew up watching my parents treat my grandparents the way I treated you. I thought it was normal. Patterns can be hard to recognize when you're inside them." Margaret offered, surprising herself with the absence of bitterness in her voice. "David told me what you said about family, that it's not just about blood, but about mutual respect. He's really trying to be different. We both are. I just wanted you to know that." The conversation ended awkwardly, both women navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain. But it left Margaret with a cautious hope that perhaps Jessica too was capable of growth, of recognizing her part in the broken relationship. August brought oppressive heat and the approach of Emma's first birthday. The invitation arrived in Margaret's mailbox, a handmade card with Emma's paint-smudged handprint and a simple request for her presence at a small celebration at the local park. "Not Bellini's?" Margaret had asked when David called to confirm she'd received it. "No more pretending to be something we're not." His laugh carried a hint of self-deprecation. "We're having hot dogs and a homemade cake in the park pavilion. Emma won't remember, but Jessica and I will. We want to start as we mean to go on." The birthday gathering revealed how profoundly David and Jessica's lives had changed. Instead of the lavish celebration Jessica had once demanded for herself, Emma's party featured simple decorations, a small group of guests, primarily co-workers from David's new jobs, and neighbors with children Emma's age, and a careful adherence to what Margaret recognized as a strict budget. Jessica's parents were noticeably absent, a fact explained in hushed tones by David as Margaret helped arrange cupcakes on a plastic tray. "They refused to come unless we held it at a proper venue, said a park pavilion was beneath their dignity. Their loss." Margaret watched Emma toddle unsteadily between guests, delighting in the attention. "She won't notice they're missing." "No, but she'll notice you're here." David's smile held a hint of his old charm, but tempered now with genuine warmth rather than calculation. "She asks for Gamma every Thursday like clockwork." When the time came for presents, Margaret presented Emma with a handcrafted cloth book illustrations of sea creatures she had painted herself, fabric pages sewn together during quiet evenings, plastic rings attached to make it both toy and teether. Emma clutched it immediately to her chest, recognizing the ocean creatures Margaret had introduced her to during their beach walks. "You made this," Jessica examined the stitching with genuine admiration. "It's beautiful. I've discovered hidden talents in my second act." Margaret couldn't keep the pride from her voice. "Susan's been teaching me to bind books at the store. This is my first attempt at a children's version." As the party wound down, David approached Margaret with an envelope. "This isn't much, but it's a start." Inside lay a check for $100 and a handwritten note, "First installment on repayment. Not just for the money, but for the respect I owe you." Margaret stared at the modest amount, a fraction of what she had given them over the years, but significant in its symbolism. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." David's expression was resolute. "I've set up an automatic transfer each month. It's not about the money anymore. It's about being a man of my word. About showing Emma what integrity looks like." The moment crystallized for Margaret how profoundly parenthood had changed her son, not magically or instantly, but gradually pushing him toward the better version of himself that had always existed beneath the entitlement and selfishness. As summer faded into autumn, a rhythm established itself in their reconstituted family. Margaret visited Shore Haven every other Thursday for Emma days. David brought Emma to Shore Haven one weekend each month, staying at a modest motel and giving Margaret extended time with her granddaughter. Jessica joined these visits occasionally as her mental health improved with proper treatment, their interactions evolving from strained politeness to cautious cordiality. On Emma's 18th-month half-birthday, Margaret arrived for her regular visit to find David teaching his daughter to count using pennies dropped into a small piggy bank. 1, 2, 3, he counted slowly, Emma repeating the numbers with toddler enthusiasm before dropping each coin with a satisfying clink. "Where did you get that idea?" Margaret asked, remembering her own failed attempts to teach David financial responsibility. "From you." David's smile held a hint of irony. "I'm teaching her about money early. I want her to understand that things have value and cost and that we need to respect both. It's a lesson I wish I'd learned before it cost me so much." In October, as New England erupted in autumn glory, Margaret invited David, Jessica, and Emma to join her Thursday group's annual leaf-peeping picnic. The invitation represented a significant step the first time she had merged her old family with her new chosen community. "Are you sure you want us there?" Jessica asked during their planning call. "Those women have heard all about how awful we were to you. They've also heard about how people can change." Margaret adjusted the phone as she watered the herb garden she had established on her small balcony. Redemption is part of every story worth telling. The gathering at Harborview Park brought together the various threads of Margaret's reconstructed life. Susan brought homemade apple cider. Patricia contributed her famous pumpkin bread. Helen organized games for Emma and the grandchildren of other group members. David and Jessica arrived with a carefully prepared vegetable platter, modest but thoughtful, symbolizing their understanding that they were guests in this community Margaret had built without them. As afternoon sunlight filtered through crimson maple leaves, casting everything in a golden glow, Margaret found herself seated between two worlds, her son on one side, Susan on the other, Emma playing contentedly at her feet. The juxtaposition might once have felt impossible, the boundaries between past and present too rigid to allow such convergence. Now it felt like the natural evolution of healing. "Your mother has saved many of us," Patricia had told David earlier as they helped set up picnic tables. "Not just with practical advice, but by showing us it's never too late to reclaim your life." David had nodded, his expression solemn. "She saved me too, though I didn't know I needed saving. Walking away was the most loving thing she could have done, even if it didn't feel that way at the time." Now watching Emma arrange fallen leaves by color with the serious concentration only toddlers can muster, Margaret reflected on the long, circuitous path that had led to this moment. The pain hadn't disappeared. The betrayal hadn't been erased, but they had been integrated into a larger narrative, one that allowed for growth, for change, for the slow rebuilding of trust on new and healthier foundations. As dusk approached and the gathering prepared to disperse, David pulled Margaret aside. "There's something I need to tell you. Jessica and I have been talking, and we've decided to move to Shore Haven." Margaret's breath caught. The announcement triggered conflicting reactions, joy at having Emma closer, wariness about boundaries, blurring concern about David's motivations. Reading her expression, David quickly added, "Not to impose on you or expect help. I've been offered a manager position at the hardware store on Main Street. The pay is better than both my current jobs combined, and the hours would let me be home with Emma more. Jessica's found a remote graphic design position she can do from home. We'd get our own place, respect your space completely." "Why Shore Haven?" Margaret searched his face for hidden agenda, old habits of suspicion dying hard. "Partly practical cost of living is lower than the city, and Emma would grow up near the ocean, which she loves. Partly," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "partly because we want her to grow up in a community that values the things we're trying to learn. Authenticity, integrity, self-sufficiency. The way people live here, it's real in a way our old life never was." That night, after the picnic was cleared and everyone had gone their separate ways, Margaret walked along the shore alone, processing the implications of David's announcement. The tide was coming in, erasing footprints left by earlier beachgoers, a reminder that even the most firmly impressed marks eventually yield to time and tide. "What would you think, Richard?" she asked the horizon, a habit she had developed on solitary walks. "Our son moving here, our granddaughter growing up nearby. Is it progress, or am I setting myself up for disappointment again?" No answer came except the rhythmic wash of waves against sand. Margaret realized she no longer needed one. The woman who had fled a restaurant 7 months ago, leaving an unpaid bill and a lifetime of capitulation behind, had been looking for external validation for someone else to tell her what to do, what to accept, who to be. The woman standing on this beach now knew that the answers came from within, from the quiet center of self-respect she had cultivated through hard-won independence and carefully maintained boundaries. By December, David and Jessica had relocated to a small rental house 6 blocks from Margaret's apartment. True to David's word, they maintained respectful distance, never dropping by unannounced, never asking for childcare except in genuine emergencies, never presuming upon Margaret's time or resources. Emma, however, thrived with her grandmother's increased presence, developing a bond that enriched both their lives immeasurably. On Christmas Eve, 1 year after Margaret had spent her first holiday without family, Shore Haven experienced a rare snowfall. Great white flakes drifted past streetlights festooned with garlands, transforming the seaside town into a postcard-perfect winter scene. Susan had organized a holiday dinner at Page's by the Sea, closing the store early to transform the reading area into a festive gathering space. Long tables replaced the usual scattered seating, twinkling lights and evergreen boughs created a magical atmosphere, and delicious aromas wafted from the small kitchen where volunteers prepared a potluck feast. Margaret arrived early to help with final arrangements, her heart full at the thought of celebrating with her chosen family. Linda, Susan, Patricia, Helen, and the other Thursday group members had become essential to her life, not replacements for what she had lost, but additions to who she had become. David, Jessica, and Emma would join them later, invited not out of obligation, but because they too had begun to form genuine connections within the Shore Haven community. David volunteered at the hardware store's weekend workshop for children. Jessica had started attending a young mothers group at the library. They were building their own place in this town, independent of Margaret's influence, yet connected to her new life. As Margaret arranged name cards at the table, Susan insisted on proper place settings for special occasions. She came across one labeled Richard Wilson. She looked up questioningly. "Empty chair tradition," Susan explained, adjusting a candle centerpiece. "For those who are with us in spirit, if not in body. I hope you don't mind. Patricia mentioned you still talk to him sometimes." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Margaret's eyes. "He would have loved this place, the bookstore especially. Then he's welcome at our table." Susan squeezed Margaret's shoulder gently before moving to greet other arriving guests. The evening unfolded like a carefully composed symphony, conversations overlapping in harmonious counterpoint laughter, punctuating serious discussions. Emma charming everyone as she toddled between tables in her red velvet dress. Margaret observed it all with quiet wonder, still sometimes surprised by the fullness of the life she had created after believing herself diminished beyond recovery. Near midnight, as the gathering began to disperse into the gently falling snow, David approached Margaret with Emma half asleep against his shoulder. "Mom, I've been wanting to tell you something." He shifted Emma gently to his other arm. "Remember how you walked out of Jessica's birthday dinner last year, left us with the bill, and disappeared?" Margaret tensed, uncertain where this was leading. "I remember. It was the best thing anyone has ever done for me." David's voice dropped to ensure their conversation remained private. "Not because it felt good, it was actually the most humiliating moment of my life, but because it forced me to see myself clearly for the first time, to recognize what I'd become, to face the consequences of my actions." Emma stirred against his shoulder, murmuring in her sleep. David pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead before continuing. "When Emma was born, I promised her I'd be the kind of father she deserves. But I don't think I would have known how to keep that promise if you hadn't shown me that love sometimes means refusing to enable destructive patterns, that it means respecting yourself enough to walk away when necessary." Margaret studied her son's face in the soft glow of Christmas lights, the features so familiar yet transformed by genuine maturity that had come at considerable cost. "We've all learned difficult lessons this year. The difference is you learned yours alone. I had you showing me the way even when I resisted following." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Shore Haven in a blanket of pristine white. Jessica waited by the door, bundled in a practical wool coat rather than the designer labels she had once prioritized. David joined her, Emma transferred carefully to her mother's arms. Margaret stood in the doorway of Page's by the Sea, watching them make their way down the snow-covered sidewalk. Behind her, Susan and the others cleaned up from the celebration, their voices a comforting backdrop of friendship and belonging. Before her, her son and his family disappeared into the gentle snowfall, their footprints marking a path through unmarked snow, not perfect, not straight, but moving forward nonetheless. In that moment balanced between her past and her present, Margaret recognized that healing wasn't a destination, but a continuing journey. The boundaries she had established weren't walls to isolate her, but foundations upon which healthier relationships could be built. The pain she had endured hadn't been wasted, but transformed into wisdom that now benefited 3 generations. 1 year ago, she had fled a restaurant, leaving behind an unpaid bill and a lifetime of enabling destructive patterns. Today, she stood firmly in her own truth, surrounded by genuine connection, no longer defined by what she gave to others, but by who she had chosen to become. The snow fell steadily, gradually erasing all signs of passage on the street below. Tomorrow would bring new paths, new choices, new opportunities to maintain the delicate balance between love and self-preservation. Margaret closed the door against the cold, turning back to the warmth of the gathering, to the people who saw her clearly and valued her completely. They were not the family she had been born to, or the one she had raised. They were the family she had chosen, and who had chosen her in return. And in that mutual choosing lay a kind of love she had never known before, one based not on obligation or expectation, but on respect, authenticity, and the freedom to be fully herself. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent, covering Shore Haven in possibility. Inside, Margaret moved among her friends, her heart no longer fractured, but whole in a new configuration, stronger at the broken places, more valuable for having been mended with care and intention, rather than hasty, desperate patching. Some people spend their whole lives disappearing, Susan had told her once, giving away pieces of themselves until there's nothing left. The bravest thing is to reappear, to reclaim those pieces, and discover they've transformed into something even more beautiful than before. Looking around at the life she had built from the ruins of the one she had abandoned, Margaret knew the truth of those words. She had walked away from a restaurant one night, but she had walked toward herself, toward the woman she was always meant to be, once she found the courage to become her. The snow fell, the year turned, and Margaret Wilson, no longer invisible, took another step forward on her own path, the one she had created word by word and choice by choice, leading not away from her past, but toward a future entirely her own.